I think we're going to start now, so I'm going to really briefly say thank you very much to the beautifully coordinated Jon Ronson and Stephen Gill in there. And apologise for the ridiculous placing of the microphone and the screen. Sorry, John.
Are you all right? I'm fine. I'll be okay.
Good. They're going to talk now about, they've had a relationship that's they've been together a while now. So I'd like to say thank you. John, as you know, writes for The Guardian every week and is Starbucks obsessed. We had to stop him sprinting off to Starbucks, so we managed to keep him here at the AA. And Stephen's photographs, we're really thankful to have his work in the front members room, and you can see the work up there afterwards. It's going to be on show for another 3 weeks. And I believe The Guardian are going to be featuring the new series of Birds next week with John's writing, or imminently. So I'd just like to say thank you very much, Jon Ronson and Stephen Gill, and to remind you that you can buy both of their books in the Triangle Bookshop at 2:30.
Have you got them? You've got them for sale? Oh,
we've got them for sale.
Makes a lovely gift.
With I won't inflict my voice on you for much longer, but here are Stephen Gill and Jon Ronson. Thank you for coming to the AA.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm aware of the fact that if we sit down, most people can't see us. Is that true?
Maybe that's good.
Do you think we should stand?
Whatever. You can stand.
The thing is, if we stand either side of the podium, we're going to look like Nixon and Kennedy in the 1960 presidential debate. You're Nixon.
Okay.
Well, the thing is, it is primarily to do with the photographs, so I guess it doesn't matter if you can't see us. Unless you'd like to take a vote about whether you'd like us to stand. I think it's a bit disconcerting.
Yes, why don't you stand?
Yeah, I think we should stand. Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
That's better.
That's a bit better. You can use this light as a microphone. Okay. I'm a big fan of Stephen's. What I like so much about Stephen's work is it lacks malevolence, and you can't fake a lack of malevolence, I think. And I think it shows that Stephen is a very unmalevolent person. And it's also full of just really, really good ideas. I admire anybody who can come up with ideas that I would never think of. And Stephen's last but one series about fluorescent jackets is not only beautiful photographs, understated, tiny clues about the way we live today, but also just a wonderful idea, the central idea. We're going to be seeing some of those later, but the central idea being that fluorescent jackets are now so ubiquitous and so associated with the underclass that if you want to be invisible in society, wear a high visibility jacket. And apparently criminals have taken to wearing them to avoid being noticed when they're committing crimes. So Stephen, what are you going to start with today?
Is the projector on? Yep.
Do you think we should have those lights off?
Oh yeah, that'd be great if you wouldn't mind. Am I going backwards?
Is there anybody standing near a light switch?
Here we go.
Thank
there.
you.
Oh, I thought, when I was putting the slides together yesterday, I thought this would be quite funny to start with, because I was thinking of sharing some slides, but now standing here, it's probably not so funny, so I'll go on to the next one.
No, it is a good joke.
But, so, we're sort of going in it, the middle, not starting from work that I started when I was younger. This is a series that I did a few years ago now. And they're photographs of the back of billboards, which a lot of people may already know. And the title for each picture is what the advert actually said on the front. Can you read it, or shall I read them out? Fight the cold, practice self-defense, de non actimol. It's time to leave the country, Thomas Cook, on the right. Free text message when you join Orange Pay As You Go. The perfect place to meet people, lovers2.com, internet, text and telephone dating. Welcome to Marlborough Country, smoking when pregnant harms your baby. That's one of the last of the cigarette adverts.
These are all presumably, or most of them, private property. You had to kind of ask people's permission to...
Yeah, most of them are on private property. Some are from the street, like this one, and which would mean asking people or climbing over fences. And actually, this is somehow intertwined with the Invisible series.
Because you were wearing a fluorescent jacket
Yeah,
to
because I
take these
used
pictures.
my bicycle to get to all these places.
Mm.
And it was then I realised, God, these jackets, people actually don't see you when I was climbing over. So this series actually did lead directly to the Invisible series.
Stephen once phoned me. I was hoping he was going to show this photograph. He took a series of photographs of roadworks, which you can see upstairs in the cafe. And he said it was like seeing a city collapse. And he came onto my house and showed me some of these roadwork photographs. And at one point he showed a photograph of a speed bump being built. It's upstairs. And I said, that's a speed bump being built. And Stephen said, how did you know that? And I said, well, there's actually a lot of speed bumps being built around where I live. And he went, really? Never heard somebody so excited about the building of speed bumps.
Yeah, but I'm over that now. But this was a sort of small street exhibition of billboards on billboards.
That you took?
Yes.
Didn't you get an ASBO warning?
I did, but not for this. I got an ASBO warning for the cash points.
Stephen took photographs of cash points and put them on the walls, and so people around London were sort of running across the road and then trying to put their credit card into the poster. And I'm actually I'm slightly on the police's side here.
Well, I am, but I'm, you know, the ASBO goes to the author of the work, but I didn't physically glue them up. But hopefully, there's no one here from British Transport Police. So, also, this series is somehow connected to the Billboard series, and it's photographs of Hackney Wick, which I too stumbled across whilst doing the Billboard series. And I live in East London. I know that part of London very well, and I suppose stumbling into Hackney Wick, it really took me by surprise. And it's a place that I thought I knew really well, but it obviously didn't. And it completely sort of recalibrated my view of that part of London. Just so intense and really chaotic, but at the same time, a very beautiful place surrounded by canals and sort of meadow-type areas.
This is where they would have the Olympics?
Yeah, this is now the proposed site for the main Olympic Stadium, which was a flea market and an old greyhound and speedway racing stadium. And I bought a camera from this man for 50p, a plastic camera, and then used that camera to do a very in-depth sort of study of this area. And the parameters to the study were the place itself rather than an idea like the billboards or the Invisible. So it was a parameter in the actual place.
Can I say something else that Stephen once said to me? He phoned up, he'd been spending a year or two at wine tastings, and he phoned me up to try and sort of interest me in writing something about wine tastings. And I said, well, what's interesting about wine tastings? And Stephen said, well, did you know that it's uncommon to eat cheese during wine tastings because cheese provides a barrier and a kind of interfering aftertaste? And I said, what else is interesting? And he kind of looked at me to say, you need more. And I said, well, what are the wine tasters like as people? And he said, they seem nice. And I said, well, is there anything, I don't know, metaphoric about them? And he said, no. These small anecdotes of mine all reflect very well on Stephen, I think.
There's quite a lot of these, so I'll move through them quite quickly. But if there is any questions or things people would like to say, I think it's nice to do it during this talk rather than after questions. So just feel free to shout out things. No need to put up hands. These are, yeah, all on the plastic sort of Bakelite camera. And a lot of the film used also was bought there, but not all of it. And I've been continuing to use the camera now for like 3 years, and it's quite an enormous body of work, which one day I will put together in book as a book. Does it focus? It's probably. And it's almost like one of these parts of London where so much used up and exhausted stuff gets spat out. So there's literally mountains of washing machines and fridges, and it was great because I did show a part of this work at the Photographer's Gallery a couple of years ago, and it was great to kind of almost be able to scoop up a bit of East London and drop it in the set. And I think that's one thing photography is very good at, is kind of mixing up worlds. And
speaking of spitting things out, when we were doing the wine tasting together, I ran up to Stephen and I said, Stephen, there's somebody about to spit a fountain of wine into a spittoon. Why don't you take a photograph of that? That would be good. And Stephen just gave me this horrified look. And the one thing you don't see in any of the wine tasting photographs is the actual spitting of wine into a spittoon, which you probably would have thought was too Martin Parr.
No, I just think that's what people think of when they think of wine tasting. And am I going too fast, or is it okay?
There's a lot to get through.
Yeah. And that's the last picture. Now we're back in London.
These are people consulting A to Z's, people lost in London.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I started, when I did it, I completely blind, just walking the streets of London, deciding I didn't, because the danger was it became a thing about tourism or visitors to London. I wanted it to be not about tourism, but about how we use maps and how. So I did literally go everywhere, but I did find myself being pulled back to central London, and particularly around Holborn Tube Station, where it's
The British Museum.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Practically every other person is. So that's probably the main point in London where there's the most amount of lost people. So it was like going to where, like finding needles in the haystack, but going to where the needles were.
Stephen said to me that after he took his lost photographs, he'd always rush straight over to them to ask if they needed help with directions.
But not always.
Not always. He said it's for the same reason that I don't wear a watch. I'd rather ask somebody the time just to have that contact with people. Whereas I don't do that. What I do is I stand, if I see somebody lost, I slow down and stand close by, kind of emitting a facial expression that says, I'm willing to help if you ask me. But they don't ask me. Go on.
No. Occasionally, if people... Well, I do... Apparently, yes. If the pictures are used for cultural purposes and books, it's fine. But I couldn't use these for commercial purposes or ads unless we then found the people, which has been done for 2 of my photographs that have been used commercially. The people have been tracked down. But no, you can't use them commercially at all. But I don't ever take model releases because I have no intention really of using them in such ways.
Are you using a zoom lens for this, or are you standing quite close by?
Just very close, yeah. No, I never use zoom lens.
So you're having to be slightly kind of covert about the whole thing?
Not really. I think particularly when we look at maps, we're so involved in the piece of paper that it's. Yeah. And I think, surprisingly, I mean, photography is such an exploitative medium, but I think when you explain to people you've just taken their picture and why, or even ask people if you can take their picture, most people are more than willing, and even to the point where when you're walking with a camera, as a lot of you may know, a lot of people do stop and say, "Please, can you take my picture?" So it's kind of, and I think photographers just have to kind of draw their own moral parameters and whether you take people's photographs without their consent and so on.
Do you find that if somebody asks you directions and you don't know the way, you still give them directions anyway?
No. I sometimes say, "Oh, I think it's over there."
You see, I'm so desperate.
I find someone else on my behalf.
Right.
So I'd say, "Oh,
He might know.
yeah, I'll go and stop," and I'd go and.
You
go
see,
with
I've
them.
often, it's sort of panic, and you just sort of blurt out, "Yes, you go down there," and then you turn around, and then they leave, and then you realise I've just sent them completely in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's true. But what's worse is when you tell them the way to go, but then they walk in the opposite direction because they knew better. That really hurt.
Yeah.
And onto the invisible.
Yeah, these are the how to be invisible photographs. Did you know that fluorescent jackets, it took me most of the Christmas period to discover this. Fluorescence was invented by the Switzer brothers, who were keen amateur magicians in the 1920s. And they did it for stage tricks. The Balinese floating head, where the dancer would take off her head and it would dance around by itself on the stage. And it then developed into jackets because of the US Army, to stop friendly fire, to stop the Allied troops dive bombing their own people in North Africa. Bob Switzer.
And didn't he something about a wedding dress there?
Yeah, the very first piece of fluorescent clothing ever was his mother's wedding dress, which he mixed up in the bathtub.
Yeah.
When he died, they put a Day-Glow golf ball in his coffin, so he would always have Day-Glow with him. Yeah, the IRA used fluorescent. Is that it? Oh no, there's another one. The IRA used fluorescent jackets in their robberies. It's a recognised Provo trick because nobody notices people wearing fluorescent jackets.
I nearly got knocked off my bike wearing one as well.
Really, yeah.
Yeah.
They call it, some cyclists call fluorescent jackets the cloak of invisibility.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No.
It's how Brian Ferry's son got into the House of Commons as well for the fox hunting protest. He just put on a fluorescent jacket and the policeman waved him on. In fact, there's a great story if you'd like to hear it. The 12 men who tried to steal the De Beers diamond from the Millennium Dome in November 2000 were fluorescent from head to toe. They must have glowed like fireflies, yet they went entirely unnoticed by the 64 members of the public enjoying the dome that day. Little did the robbers realise, however, that 200 undercover police officers were stationed around the dome waiting to swoop. The thieves didn't notice the police because they were disguised as cleaners. Where have you gone? You just put in my mind that nightmare that you have of being, naked on stage, like in.
Oh, it's even worse. There we go, almost.
That film.
And apparently any workers who are working on rail-related activities have to wear orange, and road is yellow. So this is at the King's Cross, the St Pancras.
And I interviewed for a Radio 4 programme that I do. I interviewed a surveillance specialist who works with MI5, and he says if you want to surveil somebody in a city, wear a fluorescent jacket.
Are they too slow? Is it fine again? Yeah. Now we're on to some birds.
Okay, this is the bird watching. This is the sort of grand unveiling of your bird photographs.
Yes, it's still sort of work in progress, but there's quite a few. There's some upstairs on show, and there's some different ones here.
These are basically a series of photographs of overlooked birds. You know, they're not the kind of birds that are scrutinised by bird watchers. These are the kind of birds that just go along with their days.
Can you see it, everyone? It's just up the top of the building. It's a pigeon.
It's like Where's Wally, isn't it?
That's 2 wood pigeons and 2 collared doves.
Can I read this short conversation I had with the RSPB when I was researching the text to go with these photographs, which will be appearing in The Guardian in a couple of weeks. I phoned up a man from the RSPB and I mentioned the Trafalgar Square pigeon purge, you know, that Ken Livingstone introduced in 2000. And I said, how do you feel about the pigeon purge? And this is a spokesman for the RSPB. He said, I don't really care, to be honest. I don't really care about pigeons. Every day we get someone phoning us with an injured pigeon, and I just think, oh God, not another one. Then he said, when I'm out bird watching, I never list the pigeons. I just don't see them. And I said, are the pigeons invisible to you? And he said, yes, the pigeons can look after themselves. And I said, surely you don't feel this way about wood pigeons? And he kind of shrugged and then said he'd like to remain anonymous.
Canadian geese.
Canadian geese. They were introduced by Charles I as ornamental birds, but then they flourished.
And then, nice. Raven.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there. I don't know. It depends. I try to just trust instincts, and if something comes into my head, just go and do it. And I try not to think too much. Oh, is that a good idea? Will it work? Will I like it? Will other people like it? And just almost quite instinct. I think the birds one is probably because when I was younger, that's the first thing I ever did photograph. So I've kind of gone back to that, where the birds used to be a lot more dominant in the frames that I used to take of them. Now it's, I guess, the birds are the main subject, but not necessarily any information about them at all. And if anything, it tells us more about us than birds, and I quite like that, where the main subject doesn't have to be the main part of a picture.
Well, I think this is the way that most of us encounter birds, isn't it? As kind of faraway things that sit on TV aerials, just going about their lives. And they mould their lives around us. I mean, the starling and the pigeon and so on, you know. We may have a kind of chilly indifference towards them, but they're attracted by our collective warmth, which kind of drifts up in the wintertime. I mean, I think Stephen's photographs collectively have a real power to them, because they're things that you see as you walk down the street and just don't regard, just don't notice. You know, things so small that they barely exist. So for me, you know, these photographs and the invisible fluorescent jacket photographs, you know, seem very similar to each other. Yeah.
These wax wings, they're visiting birds from Scandinavia. 120 pigeons.
Stephen, you always look for things that are on the margins of society. Do you think yourself as an outsider with a camera?
Maybe. I mean, that's the question that's been asked before. Perhaps. I mean, there's definitely, I think, some truth there, maybe a bit on the outside, although I don't consider myself as a complete outsider, but maybe there's some truth in that, yeah.
But with a camera, you're always observing society.
Yeah, but I suppose it's quite a vicarious existence sometimes, or it used to be a lot more sort of living through other people's experience. That's one thing photography does do, so it automatically makes you a bit of an outsider. So I'm not very good at answering that question. Maybe you can answer it for me.
I don't know. Yeah, I know you're not on the electoral registry roll.
All right. 2 magpies.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the first carousel, but there's some more pictures.
Okay. My next door neighbour claims to be a bird lover, because he claims that our cat chases the birds. But actually, it's not that he loves birds, it's that he just doesn't like me. He's using a fabricated love of birds as a stick to beat me with.
My sister's going to cringe now. Is that her? No. It's our granddad. For these pictures, I thought that I'd quite like to show them. Some people may have already seen them, but I discovered these pictures a few years ago, and they're pictures taken by my dad of his dad, so our granddad, in Bristol in 1978. And my granddad had asked my dad to take these pictures, and it's kind of interesting to see them because they do very much follow the kind of series that I've later come to adapt, and almost sort of these comparative studies. So each picture was in a tiny album, and each picture was numbered relating to the name of the position that my granddad was doing. So this one is, I think, the cobra, unless there's any yoga experts there. The seal. The fish. And the headstand. And I don't know, there's just something really struck me about these pictures, and I really enjoy them, and just the colours and the shapes.
Steve, do you know whether your grandfather chose that spot?
It is, yeah. Yeah. I think my dad is a very passionate photographer as a sort of hobbyist, but he's more into the technical side of photography. So I suppose it was conscious, and he was trying to compose and make interesting pictures rather than just record pictures. But yeah, I too like that really cold matte and the warmth of the orange, and this kind of damp on the wallpaper is kind of quite exotic. On a compact 35mm camera.
In Bristol, right?
In Bristol, yeah. These are some early photographs I did in Poland. A lot of my early work was a lot about travelling. I think I would sort of leave or turn my back on England and in search of places to photograph and make kind of almost like visual diaries. Looking at them now, they're sort of very photographic, and you can it's very much about me wanting to be a photographer and making very aesthetically pleasing pictures. And only in '98 did I photograph in England for so much.
Is there any particular reason you took it in black and white?
I think at that point that was all I was photographing in was in black and white, sort of 96, 97. Partly because I was processing and printing all of my own work, but also I just really was in love with black and white, and I hadn't yet.
My experience when going over into East Berlin just after the wall coming down. Going from West Berlin, it was like colour, bright, garish, and then going into East Berlin, it was like black and white TV. There was colour was all drab. Yeah, and I think that's probably almost because looking at these pictures now, not
they're not really an accurate or anywhere near accurate documentation of Poland during the late 90s, but I think I was in search of something that was in my head, almost, so I was then putting that on a place. So they're quite, I'm looking for very traditional, quite old-fashioned subjects or buildings or whatever, so it kind of fitted something that I was looking for rather than the place actually speaking for itself.
I had a miserable month in Auschwitz in the late 1990s.
You did?
Yeah, I was there for so long. I was there for a month that we left to go to Krakow one day, and without any irony at all, I said to my producer, "It's nice to get out of Auschwitz once in a while."
Oh God.
She got very drunk. You know, we really sort of fell apart. The relationship between us fell apart because the place was so awful. And she got really drunk in a restaurant at the Hotel Glob in Auschwitz, which nobody goes to because everybody wants to visit Auschwitz, but nobody wants to stay the night. She got so drunk and she said to the waitress, "Cheer up, darling, it might never happen."
God.
I said, "Gosh, this is Auschwitz."
God. Was that for a film or?
It's for a radio documentary called Hotel Auschwitz. When we went to Krakow for the night, I phoned up my wife. We were in adjacent rooms. I said, "It's awful, you know, we're fighting all the time, it's terrible." And I was like really slag. I mean, I'm great friends with her, but at the time I said, no, what happened was then as soon as I put the phone down, the phone rang and it was Kath, and she sounded really distressed, said, "John, will you come next door to my room, please?" I thought, God, she's heard the whole thing. And so I went next door and I said, and she was crying. And I said, "What is it? You know, what's wrong?" I was just so nervous. She was about to, and she said, "It's what they did to the Jews." And I thought, oh, thank God for that.
Oh, God.
It's a happy tale.
This is still in sort of Middle and Eastern Europe, in Croatia, where some friends of mine living in, actually next door neighbours, I came to know and became good friends, invited me back to their home country, which is Croatia. So I spent a few summers there taking pictures of them and their friends, and this is quite a loose body of work about that time. And this was the first piece of work that I did in colour, or the first big series. Oh, Stephen. It's all right.
Would you be able to give us a brief kind of
Chronological.
well, sort of how clearly your father's into photography, so how you maybe he was encouraged you, how you got from there to where you are now?
Yeah, trying to think. The very first point into photography was my dad sending me on a summer school. Not sending me, but enrolling me on a summer school in Bristol when the Watershed Art Centre just opened, I think. Or it hadn't long opened, and I didn't want to go. So we started, it was like a little black and white course, summer course for a few days, and got there and I absolutely loved it. So I remember that was definitely the point where, and our first little assignment was like a group of, 12 to 15-year-olds going to a farm and photographing all the animals and stuff like that. And I thought that was, and I was hooked. And then it just led to me actually then using photography as my kind of bread and butter. So I had a Saturday job working with a wedding and portrait photographer. And that then extended to after school I would jump off the bus and work for this guy as well. And then when I left school at 16, didn't go to university, worked for this guy on a full-time basis, then worked in photographic mini labs, like processing people's films in 1 hour, and then decided I wanted to continue photographing rather than processing other people's pictures. And I did a foundation course in Bristol, at Filton. It's foundation photography, a really good course. I know there's a few people here who did that course. And then I heard about an internship at Magnum photos in London, which I applied for and got, and that's what brought me to London. So I just continued to photograph, and the internship was a year, but I ended up staying like 5 years or something, and then left in '97 as a sort of full-time freelance photographer. Yeah, so that's a few sort of stepping stones. But
Presumably, as a magnum, you must have met some other, much more established photographers. Were they very encouraging?
yeah, I mean, it was
Martin
great
Parr's a
time.
big champion of yours, isn't he?
Yeah, he's been very kind to me. I mean, I don't know, not just to me, but photography in general. I think he's helped contemporary photography so much. And no, I did meet and work with a lot of photographers, although the experience in some ways was less about photography. I probably learnt more about sort of history and geography and things like that, as well as picture taking and pictures. Of course, you were completely surrounded by pictures and fantastic pictures. And yeah. But I think the boxes are maybe going down, and the hard drives and stuff are probably getting bigger.
Stephen, sorry.
Yeah?
These early, it's interesting you show early, the non-chronological
Yeah,
way.
that was his idea.
Yeah.
Because,
And it's proved to be an excellent idea.
these, yeah, it's fantastic. They seem more visually artful, I use that in a kind of
Yeah.
traditional sense,
Mm.
compared to obviously the more current.
Yeah.
Has there been a sort of conscious assuming of style?
I think so. I think it is conscious, but it's sort of subconscious. I think one of the reasons I would go to places like this is because it was so rich and aesthetic and unfamiliar. And I think I did find it hard to get my teeth into Britain because it's visual noise and not the kind of rounded, beautiful things that I was in search of. And I think, so I was turning my back on England probably for those reasons. So my work in Britain, apart from the Hackney Wick work, but I think it's a lot closer to this, apart from the technical quality, is probably a lot more descriptive, like the audio portraits and the billboards. It's sort of just less kind of emotion and more what things look like rather than, I think that's probably the difference for me. But I still, the subject almost dictates how it carries me or how I would photograph it.
It goes without saying, though, that the apparent artlessness of the latter photographs are, I've seen Stephen stand like a statue for 20 minutes, looking for that perfect split second on many occasions. And the moments he chooses quite often surprises me, but they do work. It was really when I first saw Field Studies and Stephen's book, and you see the accumulation of these photographs, of these ideas, that suddenly you're kind of hit with the I think tremendous power of them.
Yeah, and I do think there is something to be said about almost some pictures which are so subtle and almost turning the tempo so far down that they have a new weight.
Yeah.
We can have a new weight to them because we're so used to being bombarded with images, and we're sort of drowning in pictures. It's kind of to turn things the other way again. It sort of is a way of drawing one's attention to.
But how conscious are you of being in a tradition? Because one could argue there is a tradition.
Yeah.
Within Britain, social realism.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I try not to think of myself within a certain school of photography, and I'm very aware of a lot of international works that are going on. But I definitely don't kind of decide how I'm going to mould myself into a tradition, because I don't know. I just think. This is the audio portrait, a again, I'm not sure how many people have seen these, but I'll explain these portraits of members of the public who I asked anyone who was listening to Walkman personal stereo if they had wires sticking out of their ears. I would ask them if I could take their picture and what were they listening to.
Did you have to shout?
No, I usually had to tap people on the shoulder.
It's interesting that you say the word Walkman now, because at the time I said to you,
Walkman.
Walkmans. You said, oh, personal stereos, like really crossly.
Oh yeah, no. So, no, I realise
Because you
that.
immerse yourself
Just as
so
I said
much.
it, then I thought, oh no, John's going to say it. Bob Dylan's greatest hits. The Doors. Verdi Hebrew slave song.
Yeah, the Hebrew slave song.
DMX Rough Riders anthem.
Didn't he tell you afterwards that he chose that pose because that's the pose that they...
Stood on top of the pops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Radiohead Paranoid Android. Talk Radio. Something with Cream Live Repeat Tong. How did you learn to kiss that way? The Field Mice. Boyzone. Elvis Love Me Tender. Judge Jules Radio 1. Michael Jackson Bad. This was almost sort of trying to do almost a visual equivalent, photographing people watching films at cinemas. This film is Get Carter. Drôle de Felix. The Sixth Sense.
And the exposure is the exact length of the film, right?
Not the exact length, but almost, yeah. Depended on the sort of luminosity of the film. Some films are really bright, so you had to close the shutter a bit sooner. But they are between sort of 30 minutes and an hour and 15-minute exposures.
Incredible that some people are, in that, it's incredible that some people you can really make out their features.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's some people absolutely rock solid.
Yeah.
Yeah, Prince Charles. The Prince Charles.
I mean, yeah, look at that person in the second row. I mean, that person didn't move for the whole movie.
Yeah. That's Spinal Tap. So, good film.
I think that means that the person wasn't enjoying the movie as much as the other people.
Don't know. It's the headlock of Hollywood. This is something that John and I, actually the first time we met was taking these photographs on a bench.
We staked out a bench for 24 hours, and Stephen photographed everybody who sat down, and I waited a moment and asked them what they were thinking about as they were gazing out to sea. It's on the seafront in Brighton. We had a big fight because Stephen wanted to choose a bench inside a, what's it called? Inside a sort of bus shelter.
Yeah, shelter.
But I felt that those benches had connotations,
Mm.
and so we had a big sort of battle about it. Stephen liked it because of the framing of the photograph.
It's like a studio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the end I won, and we chose this bench. This is a family called the Joneses. When was this? About 1995?
Yeah, I think so. But something like that.
Yeah. They were staying at Butland's and were complaining about the fact that the beds were so hard. The girl in the pram was blind. She had cataracts in both eyes.
Shall I go to the next
Uh-huh. That's
Oh.
us.
Quick.
Now who's that again? I can't quite remember.
Didn't we decide it was the Italian lady?
It might have been the Italian lady who had run away from Italy because her father thought she was unstable. And this is Nicholas Curtis. And when I asked him what he was thinking about, he said, I was thinking about my accommodation. I'm homeless, but I'm moving into a hotel on Monday, so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about my daughter, and I've got a double knee fracture, so I was thinking about that too, but not much else. It's been a lovely day, the birds have been out. A minute has seemed like an hour. And I said, how did you get the double knee fracture? And he said, this Italian monster, rail track security at Victoria, tried to move me on. I said, get your fucking cock out of my face. I was a bit pissed. Then these 4 elephants jumped me. I said, why? He said, well, I've got 39 previous offences all told, 2 for actual bodily harm. So these rail track elephants were trying to provoke me to assault them. 4 monsters. I said, fuck off, you cunts. I'll go when I want to. And they just blew their lids. Ha ha. And he says, and I was thinking about my daughter, Amelia. She's 11. She lives with her mum. I don't know where. I've not seen her in 2 years. I know she's well, but I'd like to make eye contact, actually see her. I said, why did you split up with her mother? He said she had the baby blues. She had the baby blues before and after she had Amelia. But her 4 monster brothers and her 2 monster sisters thought I was winding her up. They threatened to shoot me, break my legs and baseball bat my head until I didn't know what day it was. So we all thought it was for the best if I didn't make contact with Amelia. Then he said, there's no restraining order. I just agreed not to see her. I said, are you basically happy or unhappy? He said, unhappy. I've got no gains, see? No gains in front of me. I'm 39. I can't be bothered with the women. I can't be bothered with the cars or the bikes. I can't be bothered to boogie. But you know what? 1 minute you're depressed. You can't see your daughter. You ain't got no money. You've got a double knee fracture. You've got an abscess on your jaw. But then something happens that makes you laugh. And I brightened and said, like what? And he said, well, a nice bit of Charlie up your hooter. Or half an ounce of sulfate. Yes, half an ounce of sulfate.
Trolley portraits.
You said to me at the time that you were, even though some of them were colour coordinated, the jackets and the trolleys,
Yeah.
you weren't deliberately, in fact you were trying to avoid colour coordinated ones.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for, I think it would have been too dangerous to kind of steer. In the same way that I try to a lot of the subjects, I think the train series, the trolleys, the Walkmans, wasn't dictated on people's appearance. It was more because they had a personal stereo or because they had a trolley, or so I would try to rule out sort of all the idea of looking for people that looked like characters. I think it was about, I would ask people regardless of what they looked like, yeah.
After we took the photograph of the homeless guy, by the way, on the bench, it started to rain. And I said to Stephen, oh, come on, let's just check into the hotel just for an hour. And Stephen was very reluctant to do it, and finally he agreed. And I sort of went to sleep. And Stephen was like a sentry staring out of the window at the bench in case anybody was sitting down at like 3 o'clock in the morning. And I fell asleep for about an hour, and as I woke up, he was still there. But somehow we missed somebody, didn't we? Because we went back to the bench. There was 2 plastic spoons underneath the bench.
Yeah, and we were kicking ourselves.
So we photographed everybody but someone.
I think this... Oh, no.
These are people on a particular train, right?
Yeah, this is from London Liverpool Street to Southend Victoria. It's quite a big body of work. It's over the period of 2 months. I'd probably take the train like 3 days a week.
I've got to ask you, Stephen, these photographs, I mean, they're beautiful photographs, but they were they were bought by PlayStation
Yeah.
in what I thought was quite a derogatory fashion. Not derogatory to you, but derogatory to the people, because basically the photograph, they would have the photographs and underneath it would say PlayStation and something like, you know,
Get a
you
knife
look
or
like a
something.
boring
Yeah.
twat, why don't you go
Yeah.
home and play Grand Theft Auto?
Yeah. This is true.
Which must have distressed you, right?
Well, it was. I mean, it was quite a big ordeal. There was 4 pictures. Sony had acquired a copy of my field studies book, phoned me and said they'd like to use 4 of the pictures: a train portrait, a gallery warder, a trolley portrait. Actually, and I think that's it. So 3. And I said I can't, for the reason that I mentioned earlier, that these pictures, I had no model release and I don't even know the people's telephone numbers. And plus I haven't done any commercial work to date, and all my work is financed by my editorial work and print sales. And they said, they kept phoning me and said, would it make any difference if the managing director of Sony called you personally? And I said no. And I said the only way I would consider it if Sony did actually find every single person in the pictures they wanted to use, and they went to great lengths to find a boy who, because he looked like a minor, although when they found him he was like 20 or something, worked in Bank of Scotland. But they put I told them the picture was taken somewhere between Liverpool Street and Southend. They put adverts in every local newspaper along that possible route, asking the boy with a tiny photograph to come forward. And I think they had lots of calls, but they found the boy and paid him quite a lot of money and paid me quite a lot of money to use the prints. And this happened in all 3 cases, the gallery warder at the National Gallery. So yeah, in a way it's kind of, it does dilute the series, but at the same time, with the money I got from that, I financed the whole of my Invisible series.
And you did turn down
and the book.
McDonald's once, didn't you?
And I did turn down a very big McDonald's commercial, yeah, and other commercials since. But it kind of makes no difference, because the McDonald's just got somebody else to do the job, copy my pictures anyway. So people then say, I saw your McDonald's ad, but I didn't do it. But so it's,
Didn't you do the people with no heads, the teacher training?
I did that, yeah, for the government. I'm just about to do an Amnesty International one as well, but I don't do many ads at all.
Are you sorry I brought that up?
No, I think it's good. I think because somebody else may have been thinking it. I think the picture of you, I don't know when it's coming up, so I stopped there.
Do you think that's it?
There's a picture that John...
There's a picture we discussed earlier. Stephen said, would I like to bring along a photograph that had some kind of meaning for me and talk about it? But I just whispered to Stephen a few minutes ago that I didn't think it was appropriate.
So I think it's the next one, so I'm not going to press the button again.
We can see the photograph if you like, but I won't tell the story.
Oh no,
That's
it's
not
like...
it. It's me, it's like Russian roulette, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's me and my son in Lapland.
No, there was plenty more.
You're spotted, it's different to these. There we are.
But you're not going to tell the story?
I won't tell the story.
Okay. Well,
we were having a really rotten time. I took him to Lapland to meet Santa, thinking what could be lovelier, but it didn't turn out that way. But I won't tell the story. The story takes about 20 minutes to tell.
so I don't know if there's any more questions or things that people would like to say. I hope it hasn't been too slow a pace. But
Have people generally enjoyed it? Oh, good, thank you.
Well,
Because it would be crushing if... So I did an event in Washington, D.C. last week, and someone emailed me saying, I hope you don't think this is negative, but I was really disappointed. And I just wanted to read my back and say I will remember that until the day I die.
Yeah.
It's like I went to a bookshop in New York and I watched somebody pick up one of my books and scrutinise the cover and then just put it down again and walk off. And I just wanted to sort of run up to him and say, "What?"
Great. Well, thank you very much, John. That's really
Thank you,
good for
Stephen.
coming, and thanks
And
for coming,
unless there's
everyone.
any more questions. No.
I'm sure there is. No.
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 Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Pardon?
Oh no, you were very good. You were very,
Oh,
very good.
God.
Oh, and we're there's copies of Stephen's books for sale downstairs, and a copy of I think one or two of mine. Yeah, one of mine, because unlike Stephen, I have a number of books published.
Great. Thanks, John. That was really good. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I thought that was good. I personally thought that was good. Did you like that? Okay, that's good. Excellent. Okay, good. I'm very pleased.
Yeah. No,
Okay, that's good. I realised about halfway through that I wasn't asking you questions, but I thought that was quite a nice thing. It's like giving information about, things in the photographs. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That's okay.